Our next presentation will be by Nathan Lujan and Erling Holm, titled Naming Our Freshwater Neighbours, 30 Years of Teaching Ontario Fish Identification. Over the last 3 decades, the ROM's retired assistant curator Erling Holm has literally written the book to identifying the diverse freshwater fish fauna of Ontario and led an annual series of very popular workshops that use this book to train enthusiasts, resource managers, and scientists from throughout the province. Today, Erling and ROM Associate Curator Nathan Lujan are going to explore the challenges of differentiating Ontario's 129 native species of freshwater fish, the joys of teaching these skills to over 160 passionate students each year, and the critical importance to all Ontarians of ensuring that this specialized knowledge gets passed down to future generations. Nathan Lujan is ROM's Associate Curator of Fishes with a research program that examines the biodiversity, origins, and ecologies of freshwater fishes. He's led over 24 expeditions to tropical South America and Africa, but most recently has been sampling right here in the Great Lakes in northern Lake Superior, sampling ciscos and lake trout. He's described over 40 species of fish that have been new to science, including one he named after his mom. I didn't realize he did this. I hope it's one of those nice, colorful fish. And Erling Holm was ROM's assistant curator of fishes for over 40 years before retiring in 2022. He's the first author of ROM's Field Guide to the Freshwater Fishes of Ontario, the book that will be discussed here today, and he's founder of ROM's highly sought-after fish identification workshops. And over those 40 years, Erling has contributed immensely to the growth and curation of our globally recognized freshwater fish collection. So welcome, Nathan, and welcome, Erling.
So as curator of fishes, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to be able to study fishes at Royal Ontario Museum. One of the amazing things about fishes is just their incredible diversity. There are over 36,000 species of fishes in the world. That is more than all mammals, birds, amphibians, and reptiles combined. And so that tremendous diversity creates a lot of opportunities to use fishes to understand our environment and the history of freshwater ecosystems on planet Earth. The ROM's fish collection spans over 1,500,000 specimens from over 7,600 species, or about a little over 20% of all fish diversity on Earth. And it includes specimens from all continents and oceans, and is distinguished from other similar fish collections around the world by the abundance and diversity of freshwater fishes that we have. Given our position here on the Great Lakes, a lot of the fish diversity that we have in the collection, about half of all of our specimens, are from the freshwaters of Ontario. And they tell a really important story about how the freshwaters of Ontario have changed over time. As the dominant, most recognized occupants of freshwaters, they can tell us a lot about the health of these ecosystems that we ourselves depend on. And then they themselves are a resource for the people of Ontario. So I looked up a few numbers just in preparation for this, and commercial fisheries in Ontario contribute about $234 million to the economy of Ontario. Sport fishing, angling, contributes about $1.6 billion to the economy of Ontario. And then aquatic invasive species, species that are not native to the Great Lakes region but have become established from other areas of the world and are often problematic, they cost the province of Ontario about $3.6 billion a year in remediation costs for addressing problems created by these invasive species. So Ontario's fishes are really quite diverse. So David mentioned about 127 or 129 species. Native species are around 127, And then we've got about 23 species of established invasive fish species in Ontario for a total fish diversity of about 150 species. And this spans a really remarkable diversity of evolutionary diversity, of lineages that are quite old and relatively primitive, and then more modern lineages and maybe more typically fish-type fishes that you might recognize. But on this slide here, we see the gar up at the top, the very elongate fish that's a little bit more primitive. And our understanding of these fishes is constantly growing. So the bowfin that you see there, the let's see, where the yep. Well, this green fish here on the bottom was just recognized as a distinct species a couple years ago here in the Great Lakes, and now we've got some additional work going on that that suggests there may be additional species of bowfin in the Great Lakes. We're developing some data sets to evaluate that further. But Erling, our guest today, has been an important, really the bedrock of the fish collection since long before I arrived. I've been at ROM in my current capacity for about 4 years. But Erling here started in 1977, so when he first started at ROM. And since that day, as David mentioned, he's contributed to the growth of the fish collection and to the utilization of the fish collection for the training of fisheries biologists and amateurs throughout Ontario on how to identify the freshwater fishes of Ontario. These fish identification workshops have grown. Erling and I, in the conversation earlier, were talking about how when he first started the workshops, he thought 35, 40 people in a course, a couple courses, he would saturate the demand for the ability to differentiate the fish of Ontario relatively quickly in the 1990s. But it's continued to grow, and I'm hoping that Erling can maybe share some light on how these, well, first of all, how did you get interested in fishes?
How did I get interested in fishes? I think it happened during university. When I was working with the Ministry of Natural Resources, I was doing lake and stream inventory surveys. And part of that work involved collecting fish, identifying the larger ones and throwing them back, and then preserving a sample of the smaller, harder to identify fishes and sending them in to main branch. So when I graduated, I was very fortunate in going into the Ministry of Natural Resources Fisheries Branch, which received all these fishes that were preserved out in the field and then had to be identified by people that had a little bit more expertise than those people out in the field. Now, we did learn how to identify the big ones, and we were tested on that. Yeah, when I joined the fisheries branch and did the identifications, it allowed me to see tens of thousands of fish, which is the ideal way to learn how to identify your fishes, is to see a lot of them. And I had at that time also an association with the ROM, because initially the identifications were done at the ROM, and later, I guess the bulk, there was so much material, they had to move the stuff off into another lab in Queen's Park, and that's where I joined them. But we still maintained that relationship with the ROM, because they would check my identifications, and they would request specimens for their collection. So that's really how I got into fish ID. I really appreciate coming to the ROM and nourishing this love that I had for fish identification.
And although you got started with Ontario fishes, your work has brought you to the tropics, correct?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, back in '86, I was lucky to get a grant from the ROM to join a group of naturalists that went down to Peru, and we started expanding the ROM's freshwater fish collection in South America. They already had a few, but not very many.
And that's really how I first heard about Erling. I was a graduate student at Auburn University in Alabama, and most of my work then and to today is focused on South American fishes. But I had, in 2006, I did my first trip to northern Peru, to a headwater of the Amazon called the Marañón River. And it was a river that the lead Peruvian expert in fishes, Hernan Ortega in Lima, had recommended as a place that had been very poorly sampled and really needed more field work. So I, as a graduate student again, went and collected a bunch of material, brought it back to Auburn, and in trying to sort it out, I wanted to find reference material elsewhere in North America from the same area. And I searched some fish collections, and I found out that this museum in Toronto, Ontario, that I'd never really had any prior experience with, had material from 30 years, from 20 years before that, collected by this person, Erling Holm. And so I reached out via email to Erling and requested some material that he had collected in the 1980s, and then after working all of that material and getting to know Erling better, I first came to ROM as a postdoc in 2009, and then spent 2 years here with U.S. National Science Foundation funding in 2012. And so I had the opportunity to get to know Erling much better, and in 2018, I wanted to go back to the Marañón. I had a research question related to fishes of the Andes, and I thought, what a great opportunity to go back to this place that Erling had been to in the 1980s, that I went to in the early 2000s. And so in 2018, we went to Peru, and this photo in the middle here is Erling holding a wood-eating armored catfish, one of the group of fishes that I study. And then subsequent to that, we had the opportunity to go in the field back down to my home stomping grounds in Tennessee, in 2022. So this photo here is of Erling holding a killifish here. And in the tropics, we face we're challenged with an order of magnitude more diversity than we have here in the Great Lakes. But what is lacking are the tools to be able to identify those fishes. It's very challenging to identify tropical fishes because there really is not the infrastructure, especially when I got started, there was not the infrastructure to be able to identify those fishes. None of the tools like what Erling has developed for Ontario, this field guide to the freshwater fishes, and certainly nothing like the workshops that Erling put together for Ontario. So with Erling, with your start with these fish identification workshops, tell us a little bit about how they grew and how they've been used, the utility of these workshops over time.
Well, the ROM workshops in 1994, some members of the fisheries community approached me and said, we need training in fish identification. And one of them, a consultant from Gartner Lee, actually volunteered to do the registrations. And so 29 people registered, which was a surprise to us. And so our two technicians, Marty Rouse and Karen Dietz, and we ran 2 one-day workshops at that time. We had a small ichthyology and herpetology classroom that could house 15 people, so we gave it in there. And the following year, we realized that one day was far too short for absorbing the massive information that was available on the 150 species of Ontario's fishes. So the following year, we expanded it to 2 years, and then in 2001, we expanded it to 3 days. And
Yeah, I'll quickly. So this is Erling giving a workshop, and maybe we could use this as a point to talk a little bit about what actually goes on at a workshop. What do people learn, and what is the experience like over the period of 1 to in some cases 4-day workshops?
Yeah, well, this particular workshop here we gave last year. It was actually given in Nipigon, and there was people from Fisheries and Oceans, the Ministry of Natural Resources, and there was a fair number of First Nations. In fact, the facility is a First Nations lodge. Yeah, here I'm showing them one of the difficult groups, which is the suckers. There's 14 species of suckers, and a lot of them look very similar. So we have a special workshop which just highlights the suckers. Another group, which is probably the most difficult group of Ontario fishes to identify, are the minnows. Because of their diversity, there's 38 species, and a lot of them look similar. Most people will say they all look the same. But each is unique, and they have different roles in the environment. Some are predators, some are prey, many contribute to nutrient cycling. And so it's very important to get that identification correct, especially when you're talking about things like species at risk or invasive species. It's important that we know species at risk because they need to be protected. Otherwise, we lose our diversity. And invasive species, they also need to be correctly identified because they can harm our environment and our fish community.
And so just what are some of the characteristics you're looking at when you're looking at these workshops that help you to differentiate one species of fish from another?
Well, when you're looking at fish, the things you really need to look at are the body shape, where the fins are located and the size of the fins, and the head region is also very important, the mouth. Whether, the shape of the mouth is very different in different species of fishes. So those are some of the areas that we focus in. We have to count things like fin rays, we have to count scales, and these are sort of the techniques that the people in our workshops get familiar with. And yeah.
And as you work with classes year after year, do the techniques that you use to teach people change, and do the materials change and improve and get perfected and to better enable people to identify these fishes?
Well, one of the things that we always handed out at the end of the workshops was an evaluation form, and we asked people to, say what's good about it, what's bad about it, what can we change, and people would often have good constructive ideas of things that could be improved, and so we tried to institute those.
And have the lessons that you learned year after year fed into or contributed to or been informed by your generation of these books like the Field Guide to Freshwater Fishes?
Well, when we started, because this is a collaboration of not only me, but Mary Burridge and Nick Mandrak, and they had equal weight in producing that guide. I wrote the the identification sections, but the other sections were mainly written by Nick and Mary. But yeah, when we started writing that guide, I'd been doing workshops for 20 years. So yes, I think trying to teach the characteristics that identify fish is probably helped. Yeah, definitely. And now, of course, it's the textbook of the workshops, and it's extremely important in having it.
So is it too much to say that all of your collective wisdom is encapsulated now in this field guide to the freshwater fishes of Ontario?
Maybe most of it. I think we tried to write it for the layman without any technical knowledge, and I'm one that tends to go on the technical knowledge side. So I often had fights with Mary and Nick about how to express things. I said, we've got to say this. And she said, yeah, but nobody's going to understand that.
So there are a few kind of products that have been generated out of the workshops in addition to the field guide to the freshwater fishes of Ontario. And one of the interesting tools that are provided at the workshops that we produce or have manufactured for the workshops are these fish viewers. Could you tell a little bit about how they came about?
What you're seeing there is one of our on the on the left-hand side is one of our field days, and we have help from fisheries and oceans biologists that come out with us in the field, and it allows students to learn how to seine, catch fish, and also how to view them and handle them so that they don't die. And the fish viewer actually was something that a professor at Fleming College developed, and he told us about it. We thought it was a fantastic idea for viewing fish in the field rather than trying to hold them in your hand where they're jumping and wriggling and you can't see very much. We designed various sizes of these fish viewers. That one there is called a chub viewer because a chub might fit into it. And there was a dace viewer which was a little bit smaller. And then we have larger ones as well, which you could put several fish in and observe these out in the field.
And then at the conclusion of the workshops, following there's a test that's given, and then assuming you pass that test successfully, you get this certificate. And in addition to the growth and demand of the workshops, the reputation of the workshops has grown. And could you talk a little bit about kind of the importance of this certificate now for anyone looking for jobs in freshwater fisheries?
Well, for many years, we gave a certificate of participation. So everybody would get it because we didn't like not giving that certificate. But in 2007, we started recording the test scores and awarding us certificates only to those students that passed the test at 70%. And actually, a little later, we also instituted, and in this particular one, is a certificate with honors. That means that Jacqueline got 90% on the tests. So there's a couple of different tests. There's a slide test, and then there's a specimen test, like a bell ringer, and people go around and identify the fishes in the tray. But yeah, I have had one person come up to me and say, if I don't come away with a certificate of successful completion, I won't have a job.
And it's important to getting jobs, right? I mean, if you want to work for...
Well, I think our workshops are successful because a lot of fisheries biologists know about them, and they feel that whoever is working for them would benefit from learning how to identify fish.
So just to review the growth in these workshops, starting in the first decade or so of fish identification workshops, they were small enough that they could be given here at the museum, but then they expanded in size so that we expanded we exceeded the capacity here at the museum. They went to the University of Toronto. And recently, and this year still, they're being held at the University of Guelph. So aside from a 2-year period of COVID in which the workshops really had to be significantly scaled back, growth has been continuous. And we've now had about 2,000 people go through the workshops, and they've been up to about 200 people registered per year for the workshops. And then the types of workshops are expanding as well, where just this year we're introducing a new invasive species workshop. In terms of the people that the workshops have reached, this provides a breakdown of the different audiences that register for these workshops, agencies and First Nations. And in addition to inviting people to come to a centralized location like University of Guelph, we've also traveled the workshops around Southern Ontario, and these have been given on site to a number of First Nations groups and also some various government partners. So with that, I mean, we've got a little bit of time for questions, about 5 minutes for questions, and if you have any questions for Erling about his long experience here at ROM, or about the workshops in general, we'd love to hear them. Does anyone have the fish identification field guide, the Freshwater Fish of Ontario? I do. If you don't, it's available at ROM Boutique. So there's a question back there. I think microphone's on its way.
I have a microphone here.
Oh, there's a microphone.
Yes, is it on? Yeah. My question is, apart from invasive species that could come into the province, would you ever expect to find a new native species that has yet to been discovered?
Want to take that, Erling?
Well, Nathan mentioned one. The bowfin is a newly described species, but it's only really because it wasn't recognized as a separate species. I don't have great hopes of finding a new species unless somebody starts dividing already recognized species into new species.
Well, I will jump in there and say we've recently had an expert in bowfin, I highlighted that in that first slide, who's been visiting, reviewing our collections, and found a very distinctive a morphotype of a bowfin from 1939, collected in Grenadier Pond in Hyde Park, that appears to no longer have a bowfin population. But he's recognizing a number of distinct morphotypes that could potentially be really never previously recognized species in that group. But that remains to be tested with genomic data, which we're in the process of doing. So great question. And anyone else have a question out there? Oh, we'll take one here quickly, minute. Yep. Yes, for modern species descriptions, we'll do both a look at the morphology and look at the DNA and make sure it's a new species on both fronts. Yep.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. I just wanted to ask you about invasive species as well. You said that there's, I believe, $3.8 billion that costs our economy because of this 23 invasive species. And I wanted to ask you about negative effects of this and also about positive effects, if you can speak of any positive aspects of having invasive species in our rich world.
So I'll clarify just quickly. So that cost is from all aquatic invasive species. So that's fishes and invertebrates. And certainly one of the most damaging aquatic invasive species are the zebra mussels, bivalves that originated from Eastern Europe and have just exploded in the lakes and completely changed the lake ecosystems. And so you can think of costs like they clog up pipes, and pipes routinely have to be cleaned, and ships have to be cleaned, and et cetera. But in terms of other positive potential for positive effects, what do you think of any positive effects of aquatic invasive species?
Well, there are some that have a small commercial. The white perch, for example, invaded Ontario through the Oswego River through the Erie Canal. So it was originally just in the Hudson River, and that it invaded Lake Ontario and gradually moved through the Great Lakes. So it has a small fishery, so it's beneficial in that way. I would say the worst invasive species are probably the sea lamprey, which got in the same way. And then we have the alewife, which decimated the whitefishes in the Great Lakes. And also the round goby now is the most recent one that's really invasive, and it's doing damage to our benthic native fauna, basically making them disappear because it's taking over.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned University of Guelph. Is there a partnership with the Canadian Center for DNA barcoding to add to that program?
Certainly, ROM has worked closely with the Canadian Center for DNA Barcoding over the years, and we have large repositories of frozen fish tissues that they've sequenced these DNA barcodes from. But at present, well, there is an emerging technique called environmental DNA, in which you can take a water sample and sequence the DNA, detect very early aquatic invasive species using a DNA barcode type approach. So that work is ongoing, and it involves not just the DNA Barcoding Center, but other university partners, including University of Toronto, Guelph, Windsor, et cetera. So certainly doing more and more work on the DNA front. So thank you, everyone, for attending today, and really appreciated the opportunity to present on the fish identification workshops.
And I'd just like to thank Nathan for suggesting this presentation and highlighting the workshop and what we do. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nathan and Erling.